Hey everyone, so the topic for this discussion is going to be the adaptations to aerobic exercise that our bodies undergo. Um, so first up, when we exercise, and just to give you a bit of background, sorry, I don't want to show you that slide. So when we undergo exercise, the whole point of this exercise is that we put some sort of stimuli or stress or wearing down of our body or our physiology in some way, where we bring down, again, whatever metric we're measuring with our physiology. So we break it down, sort of. Let's say a muscle, for example. You do a workout, you break down the muscle. The body, given an opportunity to recover, will bring not only repair it back to the level that it was before that bout of exercise that caused that damage to the muscle, but even more so. So you get a hyper recovery, if you will, where your physiological capacity is above where you started at. So again, if you started at this level, you exercise, which kind of wore it down, when it recovers, it's going to be here. So that's the whole point of exercise. So the adaptations that we undergo or see specifically with aerobic exercise, what we'll see is increases in aerobic enzymes, and that essentially is an increase in the number and size of mitochondria, right? So if you remember, mitochondria is where we have all our aerobic respiration or aerobic metabolism occur, or generation of ATP. So if you have more of them and they're bigger in size, they have more organelle surface structures, or the inner surface of the mitochondria, to be able to have more enzymes to perform aerobic respiration, right? So that's one adaptation that will occur. The other is increased substrate availability. So if you remember, we've had a few discussions now about metabolic substrates, and the main key about that is with aerobic activity, you get glycogen storage increase in the muscle. So again, glycogen is that chain of glucose molecules, and having more of it and around more readily does help both aerobic and anaerobic activities. Because again, if you remember, glucose goes into glycolysis, but can also functions as that precursor for Krebs and etc. because of that. And from our discussion previously, if you remember, when we run out of stored glucose, or which is in the form of glycogen, that's when we have opportunities, or that's when we're at risk of hitting the wall, if you remember the discussion on that. Okay, intramuscular triglycerides also increase. So we'll be touching a couple of points on this, but when we increase our aerobic capacity, we increase the capacity to utilize fats or triglycerides as a means for metabolic substrates. Because of that, we want it around in our cells, or in particular in our muscles, in order to be able to readily pull that energy and utilize it. Okay. Another point, improved substrate use during exercise. So yes, now we have more of this available, and we also have more enzymes to be able to break down and utilize these substrates for energy, but we increase our effectiveness at utilizing these substances or substrates. And what do I mean by that? Well, because we have more mitochondrial enzymes, we can break down, say, the stored glycogen better, or leverage the triglycerides better to create energy. There are a few other changes that happen with our body. Well, the last point on the next slide covers this a bit too, but we have changes to our cardiovascular system. So in particular, we have an increased number of vascularization, or the number of capillaries which feed. It's kind of like the last endpoint of our vascular system that gets to our muscles and lungs and heart. So we get more of those. They're greater density, which allows oxygen to get transported around our body. And for these topics that we've covered so far, oxygen's really important, right? It's that acceptor in the redox equation to accept the final protons and electrons from etc, right? So there's that. Our heart pumps out more blood with each contraction, and it has a bigger volume, so we say it has a higher cardiac output. And there's faster removal of lactate as well, so that helps out, if you recall back to the Cori cycle, right? So when we take lactate and make new glucose from that. So again, that all occurs quicker, and a lot of that has to do with cardiovascular adaptations. Okay, when we undergo submaximal intensity type exercise, so we'll say under 50% of our VO2 max, we end up having a greater reliance on lipid metabolism, or triglyceride metabolism, okay, relative to untrained individuals. So again, if you're trained or untrained and you're staying under that, let's say, lactate threshold significantly enough, you're going to rely on fats as your primary source of fuel. And because of that, we spare, or we save, glycogen storage in our muscles, which, if you recall, we really need that when we do higher intensity activity. Okay. Lactate threshold, I just mentioned that, but again, when we're trained, as per the last lecture we chatted about this as well, our capacity, our work capacity that we can do under lactate threshold increases, and the point at which we hit lactate threshold gets higher, right? So up to 80% in trained individuals of our 80% of VO2 max in our trained individuals, relative to, say, a low of 50% for untrained individuals. And this is largely due to that switch and increase in enzymes and metabolic kinetics for Krebs cycle and ETC, because of increased mitochondrial volume and size. And the last point here, it's a nice short lecture, but definitely worth going back and reviewing a few times here, is, as I mentioned before, cardiovascular adaptations, in particular blood supply. So cardiac output, again, that's how much blood volume gets pumped out of the heart with each pump, let's say. The increased capillaries, so again, that's the blood vessels in and around the muscles increase, therefore transferring a greater amount of oxygen to cells, which is important, as you recall, to be a receptor at the end of ETC. And increased myoglobin within muscle fibers. We haven't spoken about this yet, but myoglobin is essentially a form of like hemoglobin. Hemoglobin's in our blood, it carries oxygen. Myoglobin is in our muscle cells, it carries oxygen to help deliver it to our working muscles. Okay, so again, lots of aerobic adaptations that occur centrally around our metabolic substrate use, as well as some organelle and cardiovascular adaptations. Definitely go back, see, study those notes, and that is it for this. Cheers.